you need to know, from college basketball to the NBA and even March Madness. News of your rising stars, topics on and off the hardwood. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast. Get your ears wrapped around the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast. All the scoop you need to know, from college basketball to the NBA and even March Madness. News of your rising stars, topics on and off the hardwood. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC Basketball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. As you guys know, I'm your host, Casuan Caudle, and I'm so grateful to be sitting here today talking with you guys about this wonderful game of basketball. And I know I say it every day, but I'm just extremely grateful and extremely blessed to be here with you guys, talking about this wonderful game of basketball. And if you haven't already today, I want you guys to do something today. I want you guys to sit back and just think about something that you're grateful for. I want you to write it down, put it somewhere where you can see it, and just look at it so you can visually see what you're grateful for. Because so often we go through this life and we think about the things that we want or the things that we don't have. And so we're constantly moving about through our daily lives with a spirit of want and have. But that leads to depression and lack of self-awareness, which takes away from us maximizing our full potential. We have to be grateful for what we do have and being in this moment and understanding that we're blessed to be where we are and to have what we have. Because all you have is all that you need in this very moment. And once you move with the spirit of abundance and gratefulness, you have not only more self-awareness, but your mind is at ease, you're more at peace, and you can move about with understanding that what's meant for me is going to come to me, and I have to continue to work. And when it's my time, it's going to come. And I'm blessed to be able to have what I have in this moment. So just be grateful, be appreciative for everything you do have in these moments. But guys, now that I'm off my soapbox, let's get into some basketball. We actually have a lot on the show today. We're going to be talking about, once again, for the third show in a row, the Lakers. Is it time for Lakers fans and the Lakers organization to hit the panic button? I'm going to give Lakers fans just a little bit of reassurance. I know I have been talking about them, telling you guys to be calm. But these are different circumstances. They're in a different state of affairs right now. So I'm going to talk about that. I'm also going to be talking about the Gasol brothers, Marc and Paul Gasol. Who was the better brother? I know people have different opinions on that. I'm going to give my analysis and tell you guys what I think. And Dr. J recently came out with his all-time list. He came out with two all-time starting five lists, so basically his top 10. I am going to discuss that and talk about how recency bias plays a factor into not just Dr. J's, Julius Irving's all-time list, but also our all-time list, everyone's all-time list, and how recency bias affects that. But to start out the show today, I want to talk about a team that I have not given much credit to throughout this season. Quite frankly, a couple months ago, actually, I said that they weren't legitimate threats and they were just on a hot streak and they wouldn't be serious contenders. Well, here I am eating my words. And I need to give credit where credit is due. Because this team has turned into legitimate Western Conference Finals contenders. And that team is the Phoenix Suns. Yes, the Phoenix Suns. Now, this Phoenix team is currently sitting at 45-18, number one in the Western Conference. And the reason I want to give credit to this team and why I'm finally considering them to be Western Conference Finals contenders is because I've been watching them play the past couple of games. So they're 4-1 in their last 5 games. But specifically, I want to talk about a game that I watched where they played Utah. Now, they're playing Utah at home. And this Utah team was coming off a big win against the Clippers. And Phoenix, they beat Utah by a score of 121-100. But when I was watching them play, they put all my worries to rest that I had about them. So a concern I had about Phoenix was their ability to make adjustments in a half-court set. Because when you get into the playoffs, the pace slows down. And that's essentially what the game comes down to, your half-court sets. And the reason I was worried about them being able to make half-court adjustments is because they're a young team. Quite frankly, you see young teams typically not able to make adjustments in the half-court set. But what I saw impressed me. So what Utah was doing on their ball screens with Phoenix is that they were icing the ball screens. They were icing them towards the baseline, towards the help. And what I saw is that the Phoenix guards were able to ice. They took the ice, but they were able to snake back to the middle, leading to elbow jumpers or even short floaters at the high post. And when you get paint touches like that, it collapses the defense, and you're drawing in multiple defenders. And this leads to easy kickouts or dump downs for the bigs, and it leads to easier scoring opportunities. And once I saw that the guards or the players on Phoenix were able to make these adjustments, I was impressed with what I saw. And I also saw their defensive adjustments as well. They started forcing baseline as well, and the help was committed, but the rotation on the defensive end as well is what impressed me. So say Utah would drive in and kick it out, and so the help needs to rotate over. Their ability to rotate, communicate on the defensive end impressed me by Phoenix. And this tells me that, okay, when the game slows down and they are able to get into a half-court set, not only will they be able to make adjustments game to game, but play to play in the half-court set. And that's really impressive, and that's something very rarely that you see in young teams. And something else that popped out to me is that the guards on Phoenix look a lot more patient. And I was trying to figure out, why is that? What's going on? Why do they look so more patient? Much more patient. And then obviously, Chris Paul is on this. He's the leader of this team. And when you watch Chris Paul play, what Chris Paul likes to do is that when he blows by or when he gets past the defender, he likes to keep that defender on his hip, because it slows his pace down, but also it eliminates his defender from the play. So essentially creates a 5-on-4. And it allows CP to create contact as well. And it allows him to slow his pace down, and he looks more under control and is able to create easier scoring opportunities, not only for himself, but for his teammates as well. And so it doesn't surprise me when Chris Paul does this. But then I was watching, Chris Paul was in the game, and Devin Booker, drove by the defender, and he kept the defender on his hip, and then he went to his floater. And I thought to myself, wait a minute, that's what Chris Paul does. that's a move that Chris Paul does. And then I saw Devin Booker do it again. I was like, oh wow, okay, that's pretty interesting. And then I saw Cameron Payne, another guard on Phoenix, do the same thing. I was like, wow, this must be a coincidence. All these guards are doing the same thing. But then I saw Jerome Carter from Phoenix do it as well. I said, wait a minute. Wait a minute. All these guards are doing the same thing. And this tells me that all these guards are working out with Chris Paul outside of practice. And Chris Paul, without a shadow of a doubt, has these guys in the film room with him every single day. But that's what you want to see. That's what you love to see, that veteran leadership is having that positive impact on these guys. And it's the little things like that. So when you keep that defender on your hip, it slows the pace down and allows you to scan the court, and you're able to see everything. And so it creates easier scoring opportunities, not just for yourself, but for your teammates. And so what's happening is, if you have all three of your guards doing that, now all of them are creating easier scoring opportunities for your teammates. And now everyone is scoring on the team at a much more efficient clip. And so just right there is the impact of Chris Paul, and part of the reason why this team is so much more efficient now. Now I said, wow, this is it. This is visually right there why Phoenix has improved, just in that little instance right there. And then I was also, okay, so just not just offensively, but what else is Phoenix doing that's making them good as a team? So I wanted to check their defensive stats. So on the season, Phoenix is holding teams 100 to 108 points a game, which is actually 7th in the league. And they have a decent defensive rating of 110.3, which is 5th in the league. And I said, okay, so those are their stats, but what am I looking at when I watch them play? So they have active hands, active feet, but they don't reach. Just like I was talking about with the Knicks, Phoenix does a good job of beating their man to a spot. So they don't give up on the play by reaching or matadoring their offensive player into the lane, which means like just allowing them into the paint, shading into the help. But they actually wall up on their man, and they bide them up on the drives. And like I was saying earlier, they do a good job with rotation on the help side. And they have a lot of key steals because their hands are active in the passing lane. And you rarely see that with young teams. And which is another reason why they are where they are. And so if we look at the Utah game again, they held Utah to 100 points. They forced 14 turnovers, and they held Utah to 43% from the field. Now, that's quite impressive for a Utah team that is in the top 5 in scoring. And I believe 1 or 2 in 3-point shooting. So this Phoenix team has become very effective on the defensive end, which is one of the main keys to their success. And so when they're effective on the defensive end, they're creating more turnovers. They're creating more turnovers on the defensive end, which is leading to easier scoring opportunities on the offensive end, because now you're getting out on the fast break. And when you get easier scoring opportunities, it just makes the game so much easier, or makes so much more fluid. So they're getting these turnovers, creating these turnovers, and now they're getting on the break and they're getting easy layups, and they're jumping out to these big leads. So it's when I was looking at the stats and I'm looking at all that, so now there's no mistake that Phoenix is where they're at right now. And I want to talk about Chris Paul and why he's a legitimate MVP candidate. So if we look at Chris Paul's stats, Chris Paul is averaging 16 points, 8 assists, and 4 rebounds. Now the stats won't tell you that he's an MVP candidate, But like I just said, you have to go back and look at his impact, not just on the court, but off the court. Chris Paul's leadership and his ability to communicate with his teammates has rubbed off. And his determination and his grit and his dog mentality is also rubbing off on his teammates. And like I already said, his playing style is rubbing off, which is creating easier scoring opportunities for everyone on the court. But Chris Paul's composure as well. Everything that Chris Paul does is rubbing off on his teammates and his young organization. And these young guys are like a sponge. They just want to absorb everything. So they're absorbing everything that Chris Paul is doing. And it's having a positive impact. And now, because of Chris Paul's leadership, they're first in the Western Conference. And if we sit back and really look at the stats previously, there's another guard from the Western Conference that was in Phoenix, that won MVP with low stats. And that's Steve Nash. When Steve Nash won MVP, he only averaged 17 points and 11 assists. But he won the MVP. And so we only had like 8 or 10 games left, but because of that, we had to start giving serious consideration for Chris Paul being an MVP candidate. And we have to not look at his numbers, don't look at the numbers, but look at his impact. Look at how he is influencing his teammates and the young guys through his playing style. And so Chris Paul might not win MVP, but he has to be up there now. He's up there in the MVP conversation. And true basketball scholars, true students of the game will understand what I'm saying. You have to look at the film. See his impact, not just on the court. See how he's communicating. Don't look at the stats. But Phoenix, it'll be fun to watch them play in these playoffs. It's going to be nice to see what these young guys can do. I am excited to watch them play. But the Lakers, is it time to hit the panic button, Lakers fans? I'm going to give you guys some reassurance. Don't worry. The Gasol brothers, who was the better one, Marc or Paul? And Dr. J's all-time list. Does he have recency bias? I think we all have a little bit of recency bias. But guys, we still have so much more to talk about on this show. I'm going to talk about all these topics. So take a break, come back. These are things you're definitely not going to miss. I'll talk to you guys soon.
College football podcast? Then check out the GSMC football podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL combines. They got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Everybody, welcome back from the break. Thank you for sticking with us and continuing to listen to me talk about this wonderful game of basketball. If you missed the first segment, we talked about Phoenix and their legitimacy as Western Conference Finals contenders and how they impressed me over their past 5 games with their ability to adjust in their half-court sets and their ability to be active on the defensive end. And I talked about the impact that Chris Paul has had not just on the court with his style of play, but also with his leadership and his communication skills off the court. I talked about how I can physically see his playing style rubbing off on his teammates. A lot of the other guards on that Phoenix team are starting to pick up on his tendencies and how he plays coming off ball screens, attacking the basket, things of that nature. I want to transition, though, to another Western Conference team that many thought would be the number one team by this time in the Western Conference. However, due to injuries, multiple injuries, and subpar play, this team is facing a possible situation where they may need to play in the play-in tournament. And that team is the LA Lakers. Now, I find it strange that this is the third episode in a row where I've had to talk about the Lakers and whether or not there should be some cause for concern and whether or not the fans of the Laker Nation should be pressing the panic button. In the past 3 episodes, I told the Laker Nation, relax, it's okay. There's nothing to worry about. Yes, LeBron is hurt. Yes, AD is hurt. Neither of them are playing. But when they return, things are going to be back to normal. So relax. But fast forward about a month from then, and now we see the Lakers are sitting at the they're sitting one spot out of the play-in tournament with both AD and LeBron now back from injury, but AD has still not found his groove, and LeBron is still not 100%. And I still would say there's no need to panic, relax. But after watching this Laker team play the past 2 or 3 games, there is a little cause for concern now. And let me explain. So the Lakers have lost 3 of their last 4, right? And let me tell you who exactly they've lost to, just so you can have a better context of exactly what I'm talking about. Now, if they were losing to teams that were actual contenders, then I wouldn't have any stress. I wouldn't have anything to worry about. But let me just tell you, let me just read the last 4 games. So they beat the Magic 114 and 103. They lost to the Wizards 116 and 107. Now that Washington team is on quite the hot streak, but still, they are the 10th seed in the Eastern Conference. They lost to the Kings 110 to 106. And last night they lost to Toronto 121 to 114. Now, in both the Sacramento and the Toronto game, the Lakers had double-digit leads. In the Sacramento game, they had a double-digit lead going into halftime. Going to the fourth quarter. And then against Toronto, they had a double-digit lead going into halftime. And the cause for concern for me is that they're blowing these leads. And not only that, but offensively, they look very sporadic. Anthony Davis still does not look 100%. And not in terms of health, but in terms of getting his rhythm and getting comfortable being back out on the court. And so in the last 3 games, I just want to read off AD's stats. So AD had 26 points and 6 rebounds against Washington. But if you actually sat down and watched those games, those 26 points were a lot of empty calorie stats. Basically, points scored when the game was already out of reach, and it was it wasn't very efficient. And they weren't good looks. And then against Sacramento, he had 22 and 11, which was a better game. That's the one game where he did look like he was in a better rhythm and he wasn't second guessing himself. But then we go to Toronto and he has 12 points and 9 rebounds and 7 assists. But he only shot 31% from the field. He forced a lot of jumpers. He's still not getting into the low post area, especially on the left block where he likes to get it at. He's still spending too much time on the outside, in my opinion. And I wonder if that's because he doesn't want to get contact, because if he's worried about the contact affecting his calf. I don't know. But that's what it looks like to me. He doesn't want to get down there because he doesn't want to initiate or create that contact. So AD is still trying to find his rhythm, with LeBron also returning, and LeBron clearly still not 100% healthy. And this Lakers team, like I said, they don't look fluid offensively, and they were never really good defensively, at least this year. They never really hit their stride defensively. And I talked about teams peaking at the right time. They haven't hit their peak yet, but they're hitting their low point at the wrong time. Just like every team peaks at a certain time, every team hits a low point. This Laker team has hit their low point at the wrong time. And I want to get into the Lakers game last night against Toronto. So they allowed Toronto to shoot 40% from the three-point line. And the Lakers themselves had 14 turnovers. They gave up 48 points in the paint. And they allowed Toronto to shoot 44% from the field. So you can tell defensively, like I said, this Lakers team is not where it needs to be. And looking at the body language of these Lakers players, they look a little dejected. It looks like they're starting to worry about the possibility of them playing in a play-in tournament. And speaking of the play-in tournament, during the post-game press conference last night, LeBron actually had an interesting quote when asked about the possibility of playing in the play-in tournament. And when asked about it, LeBron said, "Whoever came up with that blank needs to be fired." Whoever came up with that needs to be fired. I think that's so interesting because even 2 weeks ago, you didn't hear anyone on the Laker roster say anything about a play-in tournament. You didn't hear any of those Lakers players say, "Well, I don't feel like the play-in tournament is really good for the league. It's not good for the players. We've already played enough games. Why? What is exactly the point of having a play-in tournament?" Nope, none of that. None of that was heard from the Lakers, from anyone on the Lakers roster. But now, all of a sudden, that you have a very likely possibility of having to play in that play-in tournament, oh, now it's a problem. Now you don't like the play-in tournament. Now you think it's a bad idea. Now that's pretty interesting, right? What a coincidence that is. That now when you have to play in the play-in tournament, or it's very likely that you will be, oh, now you don't like it. Now you don't want to play in the play-in tournament. Now you don't like it. Now you don't really think it's a good idea. very, very intriguing to me. And I think it's starting to become very apparent to the Lakers the situation that they're in. They have not played well, quite frankly, since Anthony Davis got hurt back in February. They've been very sporadic in their play, very inconsistent. And they were the number 3 seed when before Anthony Davis got hurt, and now they're the 6th seed. You have to own up to what's been going on. And I know you can't control injuries, but you are in the situation that you're in. Accept it, but don't denigrate the play-in tournament just because you have to be a part of it now. Okay, who cares? And in my opinion, just because the Lakers have to play in the play-in tournament, that's not going to affect, in my opinion, their road to the playoffs. They're still going to have to go through Phoenix or the Clippers, either in the second round. So it doesn't matter. I don't see any team from the play-in tournament, out of Portland or Golden State or Memphis. I don't see any of those teams beating the Lakers when they're healthy. But now it's suddenly a problem because they have to play in the play-in tournament. I think that's very interesting. And speaking of the health of the Lakers, LeBron also talked about the possibility of him not playing in the play-in tournament because he's not healthy 100%. And he said, I don't quote, "I definitely want to get healthy, not only for myself but for my team." And then he said he'd make the decision based on how he feels. He said, "I need to make sure my ankle is where it was before the injury. I've got to be smart with it," which you do. And he closed that statement by saying, "It doesn't matter at the end of the day if I'm not 100% or close to 100%. It doesn't matter where we land." So what he's saying is it doesn't matter where they land at in the standings. If he's not 100%, he's not sure if he'll be able to play. Understandable. Respect it. I think more important than the health of their stars is the mental attitude, the mental approach right now for these Lakers. Mentally, they have to get locked in. They have to recalibrate. I don't know what Frank Vogel is going to do, but he needs to get these players as a unit locked back in. And this is where not having Rajon Rondo hurts the Lakers. So Rondo, in any locker room, has always had that ability to galvanize the troops, get everybody locked in and refocused on the task at hand. Him and Chris Paul both do good jobs of that. And when you have a pure point guard on your roster, such as those two, that's what they can do. And that's where not having Rondo is hurting the Lakers right now. Getting those guys locked back in, refocus. Despite going through adversity, staying focused on the task at hand. And not having Rondo there does affect the Lakers now at this point in time. But mentally, even more important than physically, the Lakers have to get recalibrated and get locked back in, refocused. And Kyle Kuzma actually has said a quote during the post-game press conference that showed some agreement with what I'm saying. So Kuzma said, "I just don't think we're connected right now. I think we're unhealthy and just not good enough." He said, "We're just not together as a whole, team, staff, everything." And Andre Drummond also said in the post-game press conference, and I quote, "I don't know, man. It's just very tough. It's just an unfortunate situation." And then he followed that by saying, "It's tough. It's just tough. Very tough. I'm not sure what to do." And then Anthony Davis followed it by saying, "It's no fun when you're losing. But at the end of the day, we're the champs, man. We're the champs. We're the defending champs. So we got to play that way and play with a little bit more swag." I couldn't have said it better myself. And so what I'm saying, so reading these quotes, you can just hear it in what they're saying, that these Lakers players are dejected and they're mentally not where they need to be. They're checked out. They have to get recalibrated and refocused. But I trust LeBron James' pedigree. I trust his championship nature. I trust the skill set of Anthony Davis when he's 100% healthy and in rhythm. And I trust the Lakers to be where they need to be. Whether they play in the play-in tournament or not, I still see the Lakers being effective and efficient and making it to the Western Conference Finals. Which is why I want to tell Laker Nation, it's okay. Now, there is a little more cause for concern, but don't push that panic button yet. Not just yet. I promise. Don't push yet. It's okay. The storm is a little stronger now. The waves are rising a little higher. The boat seems to be shaking a little more. Might be getting a little seasick. But trust me. The storm clouds are going to leave soon. The sun is going to come back out. The waves are going to go back down and relax. It's going to be okay. You guys just have to get through this storm. Trust me. Everything's going to be just fine. Don't press that panic button yet, but there is a little more cause for concern. Also, with Dennis Schroeder being out, being ruled out for the next couple of games due to health and safety protocol, that also adds a little more cause for concern. But do not hit that panic button yet, Laker Nation. Trust me. Everything's going to be okay. You guys are going to be just fine. But speaking of Laker Nation, you know who was really, really good for the Lakers during a short period of time? Actually helped win 2 championships with them? Paul Gasol. And Paul Gasol isn't the only member of his family that has an NBA championship. In fact, his brother, Marc Gasol, won a championship with the Toronto Raptors. And so I was thinking about the two brothers, and I thought to myself, who was the better player of the two? So what I'm going to do is in this next segment, I'm going to talk about the careers of Paul Gasol and Marc Gasol, and who was the better player and who had the better career. In the last segment, I'm going to talk about Dr. J, the great Julius Erving, his all-time list, and how recency bias affects not only his list, but our list as well when it comes to listing the all-time greats. So guys, just continue to stick around. This is definitely stuff you're not going to miss.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
All right, guys, welcome back. Thank you for sticking with us. In the previous segment, we talked about how the Lakers are in a peculiar situation. They are sitting one spot out from playing in the play-in tournament. They're currently at the 6th seed. They've lost 3 of the last 4, and they have just not been playing well. They have not looked consistent. they looked sporadic and looked like they've had lack of energy and looked like they're just mentally checked out. Even with all this going on, I have told the Lakers fans to relax. Though it seems that things are at their worst, it's not. There is a little cause for concern, but don't hit that panic button yet. Everything's going to be just fine. And then I also talked about Phoenix and how over the past 5 games, they have convinced me that they are legitimate Western Conference Finals contenders. And they will be a team to look out for and to look forward to in the playoffs. So, with this segment, I want to talk about a couple of brothers that have played in the NBA. You guys know them as the Gasol brothers, Marc and Paul Gasol. And so I was just thinking the other day, man, both of them have had pretty illustrious careers. Both of them are champions. Both have played in the Olympics. And then I started comparing the two. Man, these guys' careers are pretty similar. So who was the better player? Who was the better brother of the two? So I'm gonna give my opinion. I'm gonna read off some stats, and you guys can come to your own conclusion. Let's talk about it. Let's start with Marc Gasol. Okay, so Marc Gasol is still currently in the league, but for a career, Marc Gasol is averaging 14 points, 7 rebounds, 3 assists, shooting 48% from the field, shooting 35% from the 3, shooting 77% from the free throw line, and has a PER of 18 on his career. Now, in his best season, he averaged 19.5 points per game. That was Memphis. His best rebounding year was with Memphis as well, where he snagged 7.5 rebounds. Marc Gasol is a 3-time All-Star, 2-time All-NBA, member of the 08-09 All-Rookie team, 2019 NBA champion, a member of the 2012-2013 All-Defensive team, and 2012-2013 Defensive Player of the Year. Now, most people remember Marc Gasol when he was in Memphis, and he was on those teams that beat the Spurs as the 8th seed. That he was on the team when he took Memphis to the Western Conference Finals back in 2013. And I believe that's the farthest they've gone with him on that roster. But he was the anchor defensively on those Memphis teams. And what made Marc Gasol special was his ability to stretch the floor. Now, Marc was an amazing shooter. Not an amazing, but he was a consistent shooter for his size. And when he first got in the league, he wasn't able to stretch the floor the way he has been able to during the prime of his career. You know, he was seen as a legitimate 3-point threat. You couldn't leave him open. And that opened up the game for the other guys in Memphis, especially Mike Conley. So when Mike Conley and Marc Gasol run those high ball screen pick and rolls, it would force the defenders to, play honest. They wouldn't be able to hedge completely, because if they did, Marc Gasol would just be able to pop out for an open shot. And so that led to easier opportunities for not just Mike Conley, but guys that played with him like Quincy Pondexter, Zach Randolph, Tayshaun Prince, Tony Allen, a number of other players, that were on those Memphis teams. Vince Carter for a little bit. And Marc Gasol's touch around the basket was also very, very solid. He had a little hook shot that he would do where he would stop from the low block and then drive middle and hook the ball off his outside hand, kind of like how Kareem did with the sky hook, but clearly not as proficient. But he was able to do that at a high clip. And Marc Gasol had good footwork as well, just like most European players do. Very very crafty. He wasn't extremely athletic, but his footwork and his IQ always made up for it. And Marc Gasol is also he's a willing passer as well. Now you see for his career, he averages 3.4 assists, which is pretty high for a big man. Like I said, he has a soft touch around the paint. And most people remember him for his defensive prowess. I mean, he won Defensive Player of the Year back in the 2012, 2013. He was all defensive first team player. And he was the thing that hurt Marc Gasol was the fact that he played in the Western Conference. I believe Marc Gasol would have played in the Eastern Conference. He would have got much more notoriety and much more acclaim, but because he was in the Western Conference, which is loaded with talent, he never got as much recognition as he would have gotten if he played in the Eastern Conference. But his pinnacle of his career was obviously when he was in Toronto. He was a huge piece of that Toronto team when they won the championship. And I stated back when they won the championship that Marc Gasol wasn't on that team, they wouldn't have won the championship. So Marc Gasol did an excellent job of, once again, being a low post presence for that Toronto team going up against Golden State, which didn't have much of a post presence. So when they were able to feed it into Marc Gasol, he was dominating in and around the basket. And he was also still able to stretch the floor and shoot consistently. And his veteran presence and leadership, because if you remember, Marc Gasol had playoff experience. And when he got traded to Toronto, he brought that veteran savviness, leadership to go along with Kyle Lowry and obviously Kawhi Leonard and Danny Green. And that veteran leadership and playoff experience really helped Toronto propel them to a championship. And so Marc Gasol was a very key piece to that Toronto championship. He also played with the Olympics, played with Spain in the Olympics. I believe he won a silver or bronze medal. If I'm wrong on that, one of you guys can correct me. But he has had success wherever he has gone. And I don't want you guys to think about how he's been playing this year and with the Lakers. Obviously, he hasn't been playing well. That's due to age and attrition. I believe he will retire soon. But we had to look at his career just look at his career in totality and tell me that he wasn't, one of the best European bigs to ever come into this league. I think it's very clear that he is. And like I said, if he's not on that Toronto team, I'm not sure if they win that championship. I don't think they do win that championship. Now let's look at his brother, on the other hand, Mr. Paul Gasol. So on his career, Paul Gasol has averaged 17 points, 9 rebounds, 3 assists, shot 50% from the field, 36% from 3, 75% from the free throw line, and had a PER of 21.4. Now, most people remember Paul Gasol from when he won his championships with the Lakers alongside Kobe Bryant. But people forget that he started out in Memphis for a little bit. He he won Rookie of the Year. But before I get into that, so Paul Gasol was the second best player on those Laker championship teams when they won in 2009 and 2010. And you can see the impact that Paul Gasol had right when he joined that roster. So people forget that before Paul Gasol got traded to the Lakers that year, no one thought about the Lakers as championship contenders. Yet they somehow the Lakers were able to get that trade where they trade Kwame Brown and another draft pick to Memphis for Paul Gasol. And now all of a sudden the Lakers are considered as championship contenders. And they actually do end up going to the championship, and that's in 2008 that year, where they lost to the Boston Celtics in 6 games. Now, what made Paul Gasol special for that Laker roster was his ability to play make within that triangle offense. So as you guys know, in that triangle offense, you got that big at the high post, or whoever at that high post, and they get the ball, and so they're making reads off those handoffs and pin downs. And it makes it easier if you're big, this catching the high post is kind of nimble and savvy and can handle the ball a little bit and can also make good passes. And so Paul Gasol was able to do all this. And that really expanded the triangle offense and led to, like I said, easier scoring opportunities, and allowed him to make plays in isolated situations by bringing it out to the high post. If he's quicker than some of the not so nimble bigs, he's able to blow by and get to the basket, or just shoot it. And that's what made Paul Gasol so effective for those Laker rosters. And obviously, him matched up paired with Andrew Bynum made the Laker teams very intense and very strong defensively. And Paul Gasol was very patient defender. You never saw him get caught on ball fakes. He always walled up the defender, or walled up as a defender, which is what you're taught growing up. And he always used his length as an advantage. And defensively, his ability to play defense on ball screens as well allowed the Lakers to switch from time to time, which makes it easier out on the guards, because Paul Gasol, although he's not the quickest big, but he does have solid footwork, so he's able to stay in front of some guards until help arrives. So these little things like that made him special and made him a key asset to those Laker championship rosters. And obviously low post scoring presence as well helped by Paul Gasol aided the Lakers in those championship runs. And offensively, Paul Gasol, he did have good touch around the basket, and he could stretch it out to around 16, 17 feet. He couldn't stretch it out as far as his brother Marc could. But Paul Gasol was very strong, and he had that little sky hook, or little hook shot as well when he went middle. But Paul Gasol was very good at the face-up game, his face-up jumper, just like his brother Marc. And Paul Gasol actually might be more nimble, a little more agile than his brother Marc. Marc's a little bigger, but he can still move up. But Paul was a little slimmer, and like I said, a little more nimble, a little more agile, could get more crafty in the paint. But Marc was the better shooter, and Marc could stretch the floor out much farther, like to the 3-point line, as opposed to Paul, who could only stretch it out to, like I said, about 16, 17 feet consistently. But if we're looking at some of his accolades, Paul Gasol is a 6-time All-Star, 4-time All-NBA when he's on those Laker championship teams. Like I said, he won Rookie of the Year back in the 2001-2002 season, a 2-time NBA champion with the Lakers, and he was on that 2001-2002 All-Rookie team. And his best year scoring-wise was in Memphis when he averaged 20 points a game. That was 05-06 season. And his best rebounding year was when he averaged 7.6, and that's with the Lakers on that championship team. So the stats are pretty similar. But Paul Gasol clearly has more championships than his brother Marc. But if you were to sit down and actually watch the two play, and I was blessed to be able to watch both of them play in their primes. I believe Marc is the better player. Now, Paul Gasol was fortunate to be able to play on better teams early in his prime, but Marc played on good teams too. But I believe that Paul Gasol was surrounded by much more talent by being on those Laker teams as opposed to Marc Gasol. I believe that Marc has more skill to his game than Paul. And Marc's ability to just stretch out the floor farther with his touch around the basket leads me to say that Marc is the better player. And also defense, they were both good defensively, but Marc Gasol when he was in Memphis was just a stout defender. He would wall defenders, and it was easy for him to defend a lot of bigs because he's quicker. He was quicker and more nimble on his feet than most of them. Now, both are great talents. Both on the played in the Olympics. But if you were to ask me, Marc is the more skilled and more talented player. But Paul might have had more winning success in his career. But we're just talking about who's better, not who had the better career, but just who's better, skill set, talent level. Who's better? I'm going with Marc. I'm going with Marc Gasol. Now, I would love to hear what you guys think. You guys can write it in to the GSMC podcast show. You can personally message me on Instagram or Twitter. I would love to hear what you guys think and why. But in my professional opinion, Marc Gasol is the better player. Both great. Can't go wrong with either of them. But my preference, I'm going with Marc. Speaking of professional opinions, Dr. J, the great Julius Erving, recently gave his opinion on his all-time list. Gave his top two top five teams of all time. So he had top five lists, 2 teams worth. But I believe his list might have been affected by recency bias. So we're going to look at Dr. J's list, and we're talking about how recency bias affects all of our lists and who we think of as the best players of all time. So stick around for that last segment. It's definitely not something you're going to want to miss.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the last segment of our show today. If you have, thank you so much for listening to this show in its entirety and listen to me talk about this wonderful game of basketball. as I continue to say, and always will say, man, it is such a blessing. I'm so grateful, not only for you guys listening to me, but just to be talking about this game of basketball. It's just so intricate and so nuanced. I just love this game. But in our previous segment, we talked about who was the better Gasol brother, Marc or Paul. Both were tremendous talents and have left their mark on the NBA. But I did explain why Marc Gasol is the better player of the two brothers. Well, we also talked about the Lakers and whether it's time for them to hit the panic mode button and what needs to be done, for what they need to do in order to be prepared for the playoffs or possibly the play-in tournament, and what impact LeBron James and Anthony Davis can have on that organization. We also talked about the Phoenix Suns and how they have turned into legitimate Western Conference Finals contenders, and how Chris Paul's impact can be seen not just on the court, but off the court as well by his teammates. I also talked about how Chris Paul is a legitimate MVP candidate. Though he might not win, he does need to have serious consideration for it. And if I had a vote, I would give serious consideration to placing him on my ballot as the MVP for the season. But as we go into our final topic of the day, guys, I want to talk about something I read online the other day. And it involves one of the greatest talent, one of the greatest players to ever play, not just in the NBA, but also in the ABA. The human highlight reel himself, Dr. Julius Erving. Now, if you guys don't know by now, Julius Erving was on Chris Haynes' podcast last week, and he gave his list for his all-time starting five. Okay, 2 teams. And I know if you guys have seen it already, you guys are thinking about all the old man jokes and, oh man, the old guys are always hating on the new school. They can never give the new guys credit. Totally valid in this situation. So let's look at Julius Erving's list, right? All right, so on Julius Erving's first team, he has Jerry West, Oscar Robertson, Elgin Baylor, Wilt Chamberlain, and Bill Russell. I'll read it again. Jerry West, Oscar Robertson, Elgin Baylor, Wilt Chamberlain, and Bill Russell. Now, what we have to realize and understand is that a lot of these guys, like Jerry West, all of these guys actually, that's who Dr. J grew up. That's who Julius Erving grew up watching. You know, at the time when Dr. J was growing up, Oscar Robertson could have been considered the best player in the league. Elgin Baylor was the best scorer of his time. And Jerry West was considered the best, or one of the top guards at that time. Wilt Chamberlain obviously was completely dominant. And Bill Russell was even better than Wilt Chamberlain. Now, what we also have to understand is that, and I want to talk about recency bias. We can be prisoners of the moment, but we can also be prisoners of nostalgia. So like I said, Julius Erving grew up watching those guys. And he almost idolizes those guys because that's who he looked up to. That's who he liked growing up. And so they're automatically going to be put on a pedestal because of the nostalgia factor that is playing in for Julius Erving. Now, if we look at his second team, we can it gets a little bit more modern. So he has Magic Johnson, Larry Bird, Michael Jordan, Karl Malone, and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. I can't argue with that list. I mean, besides Karl Malone, I would take him off, put Hakeem or Tim Duncan, but that's not the point. Obviously, what everyone is upset about is LeBron James not being on the list. And Dr. J actually talks about that. And what he says is, So here's a quote from Dr. J on Chris Haynes' podcast. When you look at LeBron and anybody he sort of picks up with him, he played with so many guys. He's the guy who's led the charge in terms of super teams being put together. When he put together the team in Miami, he put together that team in Cleveland as well and put together a team in Los Angeles. So he can pick his own team. I'm not going to pick his team. I'm not saying nothing bad about LeBron. With that statement, I understand what Dr. J is saying, but he may have missed the mark on this one. So first of all, we have to. So let's look back to it, right? So if we're talking about Jerry West, we're talking about super teams, right? We're talking about super teams right now. I mean, if we go back to his list, Jerry West, Elgin Baylor, and Wilt Chamberlain all played for the Lakers at the same time. And we talk about super teams being picked together. We have to remember that Wilt Chamberlain demanded a trade from Philly to the Lakers because he thought that Philly was too small for him and he wanted to be in a bigger market, wanted to be in Hollywood. So he forced his way out of Philly to the Lakers. And that's a super team right there. And we have to remember that Bill Russell played with a lot of talent as well. So he's talking about super teams in the fact that LeBron choosing to put together these teams. But super teams have always been around. I mean, Showtime Lakers, the Boston Celtics from the 80s, the Boston Celtics from the early 2000s, from 07, up into the mid 2010s. And yes, the Miami teams led by LeBron. But what LeBron James has done is created player empowerment. So it's okay for super teams to be created by the GMs and the owners, but then it's not okay for the players themselves to choose to team up and play. And listen, and I will eventually get down to where I have LeBron on my all-time list on another episode, but I will never get on LeBron for choosing where he wants to play. I will never get on him for that, or any player for that. Because you have to put yourself in the best situation. It's going to better you in your playing career and your family. And you have to do what you need to do. And I completely understand that. And if we're being completely honest, if LeBron James never left Cleveland, he was never going to win a championship in Cleveland with the roster presently constructed as it was. He needed to go to Miami to learn how to win, to learn from Dwayne Wade, and be under Pat Riley's tutelage, and learn how to be a leader and go to that next phase of his career. And for that reason, for that being the reason LeBron James is not in Dr. J's top all-time team list, that's not a good reason. Now, if you want to say he didn't win or he lost too many times in the finals, sure. If you want to say that he's worried about stats as opposed to actually winning, sure. If you want to say that he's not aggressive, quote unquote, enough, sure. But because he formed super teams, that's not a reason you can leave him off the list. And I want to talk, and we're talking about recency bias. The kids today, a lot of them think that LeBron James is the greatest player of all time. And they will think that as they get older because recency bias, that's what they grew up on. That's what's recent. And also the nostalgia factor. So recency bias and nostalgia factor is playing a key role in everyone's list. But that's why it's important to remain completely objective and to watch film. And sometimes film doesn't even do its justice. Sometimes you have to watch these people play live or in their era. You know, because I would go back and watch Michael Jordan, watch his own game film. Bob's, I wasn't alive when he was in his prime, when he was in the league, quite frankly. But you always hear that you have to watch him play live in the era to really get a grasp for what he was doing. And I do think that LeBron is going to be like that. He's going to end up being one of those figures that we're going to say you had to be there. You had to watch and play live in an era, because sometimes the film won't do it justice. And we do have to remember, though we do because we're humans by nature and we're creatures of order, we create these lists because it provides order and stability for us. But we do have to remember to give these guys credit, give them their flowers while they're playing, acknowledge the greatness they are without having to compare them to other greats. If you're great, you're great. But obviously these lists are good for debate shows and talk shows like this one. And it's nice to talk about. But I do think Dr. J missed the mark on this one. But I mean, it's his opinion. I just don't, because the fact of super teams, Jerry West, Elgin Baylor, and Will Chamberlain, all three of them played on the super team. And then Bill Russell played on I wouldn't call it super team, but he had a lot of talent on those Celtics rosters as well. And then on his second team, Magic Johnson, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, James Worthy. I mean, that was a super team. Formed differently, but still a super team. And then Larry Bird. I mean, he had Kevin McHale, Robert Parrish, Tiny Archibald, and then Dennis Johnson. I mean, that's a super team. Though not formed by player empowerment, but by the front office. So don't discredit LeBron for creating player empowerment. You can't do that and say that they turn around and say that you're mad at him for having a super team. You're mad at him for having player empowerment is what it seems like, but I don't think that's what the case is. That's what it sounds like, and you can't do that. But I'll give my all-time list. I won't do it like the way Dr. J did, where he did all-time starting five. I will give my all-time top 10 list at some point in time on this show, but not today. Today, I just wanted to talk about Dr. J and his all-time list and what I saw and how recency bias and nostalgia can affect how we view the game and how we view certain players. You know, I grew up in this era, so the way I view Chris Paul is going to be different from how I view John Stockton or even Jason Kidd. The way I view James Harden is going to be different from how I view Tracy McGrady or Grant Hill. You know, and does that make sense? So we have to be aware and cognizant of those things and try to be as objective and unbiased as possible when we're making these lists. But bias is always going to come into it because it's our list, is what we see at the end of the day. But the key is to remain as objective as possible and make a conscious effort to do so. But guys, as we close out today's show, I want to go back to something we talked about previously, and that's remaining grateful. We have to remain grateful for everything we have in this life and to be cognizant of what we do have. And as that translates to basketball and specifically to this topic, let's be grateful for what the players are doing today, for the talent that's in the NBA right now, and the talent that was in the NBA previously. Let's be grateful for that. Let's be grateful for what we have in our lives. All right, let's be grateful for where we at and where we've been and where we made it to. Knowing we have so much farther to go, but also knowing we've come so far. Let's continue to work hard, chase our dreams, but always have that proper perspective so we can maintain a positive state of mind and continue to be at peace while continuing to push our comfort zones while expanding ourselves. Guys, thank you so much for listening to me today. Thank you for tuning in to this GSMC basketball podcast brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. You know how much we appreciate your guys' feedback and support and reviews. So go ahead and leave all of that on our social media platforms, on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram, and on Apple Music and Spotify. You can find us on all those platforms. So just give us a like, comment, and also subscribe and share and follow us if you haven't. Guys, I will be back again later in the week. But until then, be safe, make smart decisions. And guys, I will speak to you soon. Peace.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.